Good morning, everyone. It's very exciting to be here today and actually be presenting on the launch of the New Zealand Water Consumer Survey for 2017. First of all, I'd like to really thank Water New Zealand for driving this fantastic initiative. It's really important opportunity and important time for New Zealand in terms of understanding the customer and what they think to help drive behaviour and changes in the water sector. To give you an idea of why we did the survey and what it was about, I'd like to talk about some of the key issues and questions that are of consideration for the water sector. Are New Zealanders concerned about the availability and quality of water, and does this vary between urban, regional and rural areas? What motivates people to save water at home? Who should pay for water and how should we be charged for it? Do consumers think that they receive good service for from their water supplier? How concerned are Kiwis about the health of their waterways? And are we confident that the future of our water is in good hands? So as I mentioned, the New Zealand Water Consumer Survey is the first nationwide examination of what New Zealanders think about critical issues associated with water. And as an independent survey, it provides an accurate gauge of New Zealanders' attitudes about water, and it will help assist water utilities and councils and government to develop a deeper understanding of customers' views and an evidence base for key changes that may be required in the water sector. And from my perspective, for too long the water sector globally has focused on the technical, which is obviously important and needs to have a key focus, without sufficient focus on the customer and on governance models. So these changes that are happening in New Zealand are fantastic, and today we're going to talk about some of the key results. So first of all, the importance of the customer. Customers are central to the work of the water utilities, and therefore it's imperative to understand their needs, concerns and values. And what better way to actually understand the customer than to actually ask them? You can see that there's been an increasing drive and increasing focus, both in New Zealand and globally, to prioritise the customer, but I think as a water sector, we're still on a journey in terms of saying we value the customer, but learning what they think, what they feel, how to effectively engage with them. And you can see here some extracts from websites, from Watercare and Wellington Water, where the customer is prevalent in terms of their priority and their focus and their approach. But it's not just in New Zealand, it's elsewhere around the world as well. Examples here from Sydney Water and Welsh Water, but I could take numerous websites from around the world where the customer is the focus of the charter and of the strategy of these utilities and how they engage with them more effectively. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but before I move further, I'd really like to thank the Survey Steering Committee for their involvement in the development of this survey. And some of the key water utilities that were involved include Watercare, Wellington Water, Tauranga Council, Tauranga City, Auckland Council, Waikato, Western Bay of Plenty District Council, Gore, and Hauraki District Council. I'd also like to thank James Peveril and Priani Madden from Arapu, who played a key role in the development of this survey. So how was the survey developed, and what was the approach? So in order to develop this survey, a systematic approach was utilised to help provide that evidence base, which will inform both the New Zealand water sector as a whole, but also individual regions. 31 questions were developed in consultation with the steering committee based on some of the key issues. The survey was conducted over 7 weeks and circulated to customers right across the nation. And there were more than 4,500 completed responses. And to give you an idea of the validity of the survey in terms of sample size, that's almost 5 times the political polling response rate that's used to understand customers in New Zealand. $2,000 prize draw was really used to help incentivise customers to complete the survey. Key issues, and I won't talk through all of these in detail, but customer centricity is obviously a focus, the need to accommodate rapid growth, water quality and health concerns, climate change resilience, drought and water shortage, waterway contamination, especially by sewage overflows, the need for national governance of water services, and charging for water abstraction and transparency in water pricing. And as we've already heard from the Mayor this morning, and as you'll be seeing regularly in the papers at the moment, water's increasingly becoming a political issue in New Zealand, and it's coming from Australia, that's quite exciting. We love seeing water at the forefront of the nation's consciousness and as a key consideration. So it's exciting to see that it's an important issue, because that provides an opportunity and a catalyst to help drive change. So survey questions. So looking at having identified those key issues in consultation with the steering committee, we then identified questions that focused on the following topics around water quality and water concerns, saving water, the price of water, billing, extracting water from the environment, communication with water suppliers, customer service, water management, water knowledge, and quality of waterways. But I just want to move quickly through that, because I really want to get into what some of the results were. In terms of developing the survey, it's important to understand the demographics, so you can do comparisons across regions, across genders, across locations. And you can see from this slide here, we looked at 16, we broke New Zealand up into 16 different regions, so we could then identify what individuals' views were in a region, which could be compared with others. We identified who worked or had previously worked in the water sector, and it was fantastic that 84% of respondents weren't from the water sector. So we have a really good sample size of non-water related consumers' views, where they live, urban, regional, rural areas, female or male, how old, we had a really good spread there, where their usual residence was, and do they own or rent their usual residence. And that enabled us to compare results and look at them in terms of what they may mean. But not only that, and not only the development of the report, which you can see here and is available online, we're going to have some postcards. Priyani and James are going to be waiting at the door, and there's postcards which have details of the link to the report and link to the data visualization tool, which you'll be able to get on the way out, because it's being launched live today. But not only did we develop a report with the results, but we've developed a live and interactive data visualization tool, which enables any utilities and any customers from all of New Zealand to go onto the website, click on their region, click on a particular demographic detail, and look at what people, what they think as individuals or as a group, as opposed to other parts of New Zealand. So it's really taking that survey to another level, to have that interactive process where people can analyse and understand what does that mean for them. So the report that's been developed really focuses on 5 key themes: water use and efficiency, and focusing on respondents' motivation to save water and where they save water around the home, the pricing of water, how much water they use, and whether they would prefer to be charged for how much they use or have a fixed charge, customer experience, the perceived quality of service of water utilities, and future of water, so looking at customers' perceptions around the management and governance, as well as what issues they're concerned about, and finally waterway health, and concerns respondents about the quality of waterways and the contaminants in those waterways that concern them. So they were the 5 key themes. But what do the consumers' results actually tell us? First of all, if we look at water use and efficiency, the results showed that in regard to saving water, 86% are concerned about water shortages, and 67% of respondents' primary driver is to save water for environmental reasons. And that was pretty consistent across the country, across different demographics. The one anomaly being, interesting anomaly being, that in Auckland, people who are 30 years or older, their primary concern around water shortages is about actually saving water to save money. And that obviously brings in an interesting theme which rolls through a lot of the survey, is that in the regions that are metered, and predominantly obviously Auckland and Tauranga, often you get a different view about water efficiency and how to do it. And that focus that people in Auckland have on saving water is driven by the metering, but also obviously helps impact the environment. So it's one thing to say as New Zealanders that we want to protect the environment, but how do we change and drive that behaviour? And that pricing of water, which we see in Auckland, and the metering of water is obviously been something that's driven a different behaviour and different belief in that part of New Zealand. If we then look at the price of water, With respect to the price of water, respondents are generally in favour of paying for how much water they use instead of a fixed charge. So it follows on from that theme I mentioned before. So 63% agree that they would prefer to pay for how much water they use rather than have a fixed charge. But we can then drill down and understand that a little bit more in terms of different parts of New Zealand. And once again, those two areas, Auckland and Tauranga, 87% of people in Auckland prefer to pay for how much they use. Tauranga, 71%. And then it drops down to 43 in places like Canterbury and 46% in Wellington. But you can see that people who've been metered obviously see the benefits in that and recognise that that's important to them. The other interesting piece of information that came out when looking at the price of water was that throughout New Zealand, 25 to 29-year-olds think that the price of water is too low, whereas people who are over 30 think it's about right. So we've got a generation coming through who recognise that paying more for water, there's some benefit in that in terms of what that means. So it's good to see that coming through in terms of that next generation in New Zealand. The third area around customer experience. So respondents are concerned about drinking water quality in New Zealand. However, they're generally confident that their water suppliers are providing high quality drinking water. So you can see 83% are confident that their water suppliers are providing high quality drinking water. But once again, if you look at this geographically, it appears that when we move away from cities in New Zealand, that the confidence in terms of the quality of the drinking water reduces. And so it's 87% in urban areas, 68% in regional areas, 64% in rural areas. So as we move away, that confidence decreases. But at the same time, 83% are confident, but 89% are concerned about drinking water quality in New Zealand. And if we look at that, that actually takes the opposite curve. So 88% in urban areas are concerned, 92% in regional, and 91% in rural areas. So basically, as the confidence in the quality of water goes down from urban to regional and rural areas, the concern goes up. So we're seeing that correlation there where there's an increased level of concern in some of those areas. And some of that's reflected even more so in particular parts of New Zealand where there've been concerns about drinking water quality. The other item around customer experience is around the observed changes in look, smell and taste of water. So that increases as you move from urban to regional and rural areas as increased observation of those changes that are occurring. If we then move to the price of water, there was a significant response to the need to charge when taking water from the environment for industry, including bottled water. So obviously this is a very topical issue in New Zealand at the moment. But if you look here, 89% agree that there should be a cost when taking water from the environment for bottled water and similar industries. But not only that, 59% believe that there should be a cost when taking water from the environment for all users. And it was 77% for people taking water from the environment for agricultural purposes. And if we look throughout the survey, this was consistent across the country, across ages, and it was the strongest response. And it's, from my perspective, it sends a signal to the government that consumers really want to see that that environment is protected by having charges for water taken from those environments. Customer experience. Consumers generally believe that water suppliers provide high quality customer service. But once again, this is higher in urban areas as opposed to regional and rural areas. So you look at this, 58% of people believe that water suppliers provide high quality customer service, but that's about 61% in urban areas, and it drops down to about 48% in rural areas. And the third area I'd like to discuss on this slide is healthy waterways. And respondents are concerned about poor water quality in their waterways. 73% you can see here. And the issue that they're most concerned about in terms of contaminants, if we move to this next slide, is litter. So you can see 63% stated that litter and floating plastics were the pollutants in their local area that concerned the most, followed by sewage overflows. So there's significant concern about the waterways, and there's a theme that comes through the survey again, is that New Zealanders have a huge passion for the environment and making sure their waterways are protected, and that they want to pay. They're happy to pay for making sure that occurs. So moving on to the future of water, you can see here some concerning statistics around consumers and the service that they're provided. And if we look at the 16% number here, only 16% agree that local and national governments work together to make the right decisions for New Zealand's water resources. Now that's an alarming number, and that's sort of supported by the fact that only 19% of respondents agree that local and national governments adequately plan for the future. So when we talk about the future of water, the consumers are saying that from their perspective, there's not sufficient collaboration between local and national government, and and obviously as a result of that, there's not sufficient planning for the long-term future. And I'll talk a little bit later about water suppliers and their views about that, but they correlate once again where there's a low percentage of consumers that are confident that the water suppliers are planning for the future as well. So a question we need to ask ourselves based on those results is whether the governance and regulatory models that New Zealand currently has are appropriate given the extremely low confidence that the consumer has. If we then look at environmental concerns, you can see here 85% are somewhat to very concerned regarding climate change impacts. And it's clear that the large majority of consumers are concerned about those impacts in general, as well as drought, flooding, earthquakes, population growth, and related impacts to the environment. So from these results, and we can see that there's clearly some fascinating insights into what the consumer thinks, and the evidence base that this provides for the water sector to engage with federal government, local government, more broadly with one another in terms of what changes need to be driven, and how do they actually start to implement those. So we've seen some results here from a New Zealand perspective, and using the data visualization tool, it's very easy for local water utilities to compare themselves and contrast themselves with other utilities around the country, and to use them to understand their customers better. But how do they then take those and reflect on what that might mean in terms of how they compare globally? So one comparison we've done is to look at some of the results with respect to Australia. So there's some similarities obviously between the two nations, and what we've done here is we've taken some of the similar results from last year's Australian Water Survey, the 2016 Australian Water Outlook, and compared them. And for many of them they're very similar, but there's a couple that were quite significantly different. So most of the ones on this slide are concerns about water shortage, slightly higher in Australia, but given some of the differences in Australia in terms of being a large continent and having had major challenges with drought, and particularly with regional areas, that's understandable. Climate change, very similar. Price of water, you can see here that more Australians think that the price of water is too high, but a lot of Australians live in urban environments where they've had significant increases in their price of water through desalination and other measures. 43% think it's about right in New Zealand, which is slightly higher than New Zealand. The interesting thing about New Zealand is that, as I mentioned before, that 25 to 29-year-old generation coming through is prepared to pay more. But this slide provides some interesting numbers, which I think from a New Zealand perspective are important to focus on. There's only 58% of New Zealanders that believe they're getting a high quality of service, which compared to Australia, the numbers in Australia are significantly higher at 74%. But once again, those numbers change from the urban through to the rural and regional areas. And they're as low as 42% for the rural areas in terms of the confidence in their quality of service. So there's some significant concerns in rural areas around that. Government decisions, the numbers here in terms of these two, on the surface appear that more Australians aren't confident about government decisions. And I could talk a lot about that, but I won't today. But the actual, but the number I talked about before, whilst 50% are not confident in government decisions, there's a lot of people who are unsure who don't know. So only 16% said they're confident in government decisions in New Zealand. So it's a significant concern here as well. You can see similarities around saving water, the highest concern, highest motivator being environmental concerns. And this last slide on the comparison, once again, provides a really interesting insight into the consumer's views around water suppliers planning for future needs. And in Australia, 54% are confident. But in New Zealand, only 29% are confident that water suppliers are planning for future needs. So we're seeing that theme that there's concerns around national and local government working together, national and local government planning for the future, and then water suppliers being able to plan for the future needs. So reflection on why that's occurring and what that means is really important. Is it because of the customers having limited visibility to what the utilities are doing and lack of engagement with them? Is it perception rather than reality? Is it because the industry is being reactive rather than proactive? Or is it a combination of all of the above? But significant engagement and follow-up is recommended to fully understand these results, as they are concerning, and provide an opportunity to try and drive change in those areas. So what do some of these results mean for the industry? First of all, if we look at leadership, leadership in terms of saving water and tackling climate change. So consumers don't currently believe that their water suppliers are being environmentally responsible or doing enough to help them become more water efficient. There appears to be a lack of trust in water suppliers, and this is possibly partly to do with a lack of understanding around the governance of water supply in New Zealand. But consumers are generally not confident in the investment from water suppliers into flooding, protection or earthquakes. And there's a really important opportunity for water suppliers to take leadership in saving water and demand management. The suppliers can take steps towards encouraging consumers to be more water efficient, such as providing rebates for water efficient devices, metering their water use, and educational tools. And you saw that theme of the metering. In the places where there's been metering in New Zealand, there's been huge reduction in water use, but there's also been really high acceptance by the consumers in those areas for having metering and for being paid on a volumetric base rather than a fixed base. So the consumer's telling us what they want, but how do we actually respond to that? Community engagement and knowledge sharing. As I mentioned, there appears to be a lack of understanding amongst a lot of the respondents regarding the structure of water governance. When we did the survey, only 7% of respondents knew, and we broke into ranges, but we said how many respondents know that there's the number of water utilities in the country, and we had ranges, so 51 to 100. So it was a pretty broad range, but only 7% of respondents were able to say there's between 51 and 100 utilities in New Zealand. So there's a lack of awareness on how many organisations are responsible for water supply. There's a lack of awareness on terms of who's driving that in terms of local and national government, and there's a lack of understanding around some of those key issues. So this presents a really exciting opportunity for water suppliers to engage with the community, both in decision-making processes and in knowledge sharing. And there's also an opportunity for regional centres and rural communities to invest more in customer service and provide consistency across the country. More than 1 in 3 respondents would like more communication from their water supplier. So we need to be engaging with them more. That's what they're asking for. Efficiency in governance and processes with a forward-thinking approach. So that theme around water pricing across the country and more transparent processes rather than having water bills embedded in council rates. How do we provide a transparent process so people know how much they're paying? The concern around not paying for water from the environment for bottled use and for other uses was a key theme. But it's great to hear. It was great to hear the Mayor talking before about CCOs and what that means for the Hamilton region and what it means for other regions in New Zealand. We really need to look at, well, what are more efficient ways of actually both engaging with the customer but also governance and regulation in a New Zealand context. Quality of water and waterways is clearly really important to New Zealanders. The environment's something that's a real focus of theirs, and consumers expect consistently high quality drinking water, but also want cleaner waterways. Key infrastructure. So there's clear feedback consumers want to see investment in flood prevention, earthquake resilience, sewerage, stormwater management. But once again, as we talked about, they don't seem to be confident in water supply's ability to invest in infrastructure to meet these future needs. So is this due to governance and regulation models? Is it due to the decentralised water supplier approach in New Zealand? Is it due to limited customer engagement, or is it a combination of a number of these different factors? Whatever it is, there's a clear indication that there's concerns from the consumer that as an industry we need to respond to. So what are some next steps? Having undertaken this first survey, it provides a good baseline for understanding what the consumer thinks. One of the things we'd encourage is actually having regular follow-up surveys. So as the New Zealand water sector implements changes in terms of customer engagement, in terms of governance models, in terms of looking at regulation, in terms of different policies, understanding what impact that's having on the consumer's views. So we can monitor over time changes in their perception of performance of the water sector. Regional analysis, I really encourage different regions throughout the country to actually use that data visualization tool to understand specifically what the customers are saying in your region, how it might compare, and what are areas that you can focus on to help respond to their individual needs. And what we're seeing is that the customer really wants to have engagement with the utilities, but also we're seeing an opportunity to use information like this as an evidence base for the water sector to engage with federal government, to engage with local government, and to more effectively help use it as a basis for driving changes which will be beneficial for the water sector in New Zealand. So in conclusion, the importance of the customer focus is obvious when we undertake surveys like this, because it gives us insights into what they think. And we've been able to highlight and see that consumers drive for environmental concerns and concerns for climate change, that they recognise the need and would like to see more transparency in pricing and charging for use, that waterways are an issue where they want to see a real focus on and have a desire to see charging for extraction from waterways, and the importance of consistent water quality across urban, regional and rural areas. And we're seeing a real discrepancy from region to region, but also across that urban, regional, rural space. And finally, that the future of water, there's significant concerns about local and national government, and there's concerns about water suppliers in terms of how they're able to plan for the long-term future. So from these results, we've seen that there's real diversity across demographics. New Zealand has a decentralised water utility model. Is that the most efficient one moving forward to meet customers' needs? And there's a real opportunity and need to engage with customers more effectively. Over the course of the conference, there's going to be some different sessions, but one of the key ones this afternoon is the customer forum, which we're undertaking with Watercare chairing, looking at and analysing this data visualisation tool. So there's going to be an opportunity for you as individuals to ask questions about specific areas where you'd like more information. So I encourage you to come along to the customer forum this afternoon. I encourage you to take a postcard on the way out, which has the link, which is also here for the survey. Read the report, use the tool to look at your local region and undertake some comparisons, and consider what that means for your consumers and how you can more effectively engage with them. Thank you very much.